I remember I messaged you once about this, but Kanye's team reached out a couple years ago and they were just like, yeah, we keep hearing about this Immi brand. And they were like, Ye really wants to create an instant ramen brand. His dream is to feed the world with ramen because it's his favorite food. And we were just like, what? This is mind blowing that like Ye would be interested in this.
I had a really fun time talking with Kevin Lee, who's the founder of Immi Ramen. We talked about healthy eating within the Asian American community and how they're building a healthy ramen that is both low carb and high protein. We talked about operating systems and how he applies that to running his company and how he applies that to his personal life. And we just talk about everything from culture to parenting to just funny stories. I really enjoyed this episode and I hope you do too. So here we go. Welcome to another episode of the Carnage and Apricorn Show. Today, I'm really excited to have Kevin Lee from Immi Ramen, and he's an entrepreneur I've known for quite some time now, a few years. I also angel invested into the company, so I'm really excited for the mission and healthy food and nutrition, especially within Asian cultures, is something that I'm pretty passionate about. So I'm really excited to have Kevin here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I guess to get started, for those that don't know what Immi is, do you want to just maybe give a quick background and what inspired you to start it?
Yeah, definitely. So my co-founder and I, his name is also Kevin. He is Thai. He's Thai. So he's
Okay.
a Chan Pan with his last name. So we call him K Chan and I'm K Lee. We just append our last names. We both grew up in Asian food families. So my grandparents are actually produce farmers out in Taiwan. They grow something called the rose apple, and that's where I spent most of my childhood, just kind of like picking, stemming, packaging fruit with them. And then my co-founder K Chan, his grandmother sold egg noodles out of a hawker stall in Thailand. And then his dad ran a Thai supermarket and then later a Thai restaurant down in Los Angeles. So it's, we kind of grew up in this environment where we watched both of our families, our extended families, just, the traditional Asian food that's common in our culture, a lot of white starchy rice and like noodles. And I would say other than that, I think there's like a common stereotype in America that Asian food is unhealthy. I think the truth is it's actually like relatively healthy.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it can be bastardized, like in the US culture where you have a lot of these like orange chickens and things that weren't native to like Asian cultures. But that being said, yes, I think like if you go to Asia, Taiwan, Thailand, they still are using like quite like seed oils and just a lot of like high sodium, like high preservative sauces in most of the foods. So there's of course going to be negative health effects. So as we grew older, what we noticed was in both of our families, there were really high rates of chronic health conditions, primarily diabetes and blood pressure. And so my co-founder and I kind of took a look at a lot of the childhood Asian foods we grew up eating, and we said, well, instant ramen is this massive, food category that it doesn't matter if you're Asian, whatever race you are, you've probably had it at some point in your life. But you've probably, like, whenever you ask people, do you still eat instant ramen? They're always like, no. That like, I always feel so guilty the next morning
Yeah.
after I eat it. And it's like the most common thing you'll hear. So we said, well, why does that have to be the case? Why can't we take this beloved food that everyone knows and loves, but make it actually nutritious and like use higher quality ingredients and something you can like guilt free in a way?
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Seoul in Korea. I used to get the ramen packs and I would just take the seasoning and throw it in there and mix it up and crunch it up and just eat it like a snack. I don't know if that was like
Nice.
the healthiest thing to eat, but I just remember that being my childhood.
Yeah, totally remember that.
What makes the ramen healthy?
Well, the first thing I was caveat is, so, I spend a lot of time, I think because Immi is really this combination of like a food and beverage as well as a health and wellness product. We're kind of this in between. Well, the first thing I'll answer your question, which is what we did was we took a lot of the traditional like starches that you would find in traditional instant ramen, and traditional instant ramen just really just uses like wheat flour, and they use some other stuff like consui, which is like an alkaline solution which makes it springy. We took out a lot of that wheat flour and we replaced it with plant-based proteins. So right now we use pumpkin seed protein. We are considering like different plant proteins in the future to swap those out. And then we use like some other like very fiber forward ingredients. So what ends up happening is you take a lot of these carbs and you're effectively replacing them with proteins and fibers. There's a double benefit. One is you obviously get more protein, plant-based protein in the body, but because of all the extra fiber, you really slow that blood glucose impact. So we, I think it's not like we market ourselves as a diabetic product. We have thousands and thousands of diabetic customers across the nation who are just very happy to be able to eat ramen again without spiking their blood sugar.
Yeah.
And it's something we were careful about. We wore continuous glucose monitors when we were formulating the product. And it's funny because I think the majority of the population has no idea what metabolic health or blood glucose is, but we were like, well, we got to make a product that like our grandparents could, because my
Yeah.
grandmother literally she's pre-diabetic. And that was pretty important for us. So Immi became kind of the world's first low carb, high protein and
Yeah.
plant-based instant ramen.
You mentioned that most Asian food is healthy. What parts of the diet makes up like that unhealthy portion that leads to some of these chronic health conditions?
I think that a lot of Asian food, so like for one, I think a lot of Asian, it depending on your culture, but a lot of it is like shared food, and
Yeah.
it's not like you're eating huge individual portions. And there's still a lot of like it's a lot of proteins and vegetables with every meal. There's typically a soup, like a broth. So it's nothing too crazy, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's like extremely carb heavy, like other cultures. I think South Indian, like Indian culture, for example, I know a lot of folks have stated it's very carb heavy in that
Hmm.
sense. But for, I would say, like East Asian food, a bowl of rice or a bowl of noodles is pretty standard as like an accompaniment with every single meal. And if you've ever measured your blood sugar while eating like a bowl of white rice, like for most people, I would say it spikes pretty hard just from like a blood glucose standpoint. And I think the reason a lot of like the Asian community is especially prone to diabetes is because Asians from the outside don't really look obese, but Asians have quite a bit of visceral fat, which is like
Mm.
fat that kind of surrounds the internal organs. And so there's like a surprising statistic, which is like 1 in 3 Asians don't even realize that they actually are pre-diabetic or like on the verge of being diagnosed with diabetes. And it's one of those things where a lot of people realize like, oh my God, like I thought I was like skinny. I don't really weigh that much, but why am I contracting diabetes? So that's, I think, is pretty serious issue in the Asian population. And if you ask most Asians in the street, like they probably have a family member with diabetes or is pre-diabetic.
It's so crazy that you said that because I just got the DEXA scan and had one of those glucose monitors. And a couple of things that I realized is I feel like I work out and I do try to eat a lot of protein, but I still had a lot of visceral fat really around a lot of the organs. And I didn't really have a lot of fat in other areas, but it was like really concentrated like in the middle of my stomach and in that
Right.
area. I would probably describe myself as eating healthy mostly, but I was still shocked to notice that. And that was like the one thing that stuck out from the DEXA scan. And when I was
Hmm.
wearing the glucose monitor, it's just really hard for me to not eat rice. Like today I had rice and sweet potatoes for lunch. I think most people really enjoy eating the foods they ate when they were a kid. And I would say my staples were rice and noodles and some type of protein because I grew up in Korea. So it's like Korean barbecue or some
Yeah.
fried food. I mean, a lot of fried foods because I'm also half Thai as well. It's part of like my culture and it was part of how I was raised. So felt like it's been really difficult for me to switch off of that. I can cut out alcohol, I can cut out meat, but I could cut out noodles even, but rice is super hard. So yeah, every time, my sugar would spike, it would be because I just had a huge bowl of rice with whatever I was eating. But you're right that
Hmm.
like when I go out to eat with my friends in New York, when we would go eat, like a traditional Chinese dinner, it would be a lot of share plates, a lot of vegetables with 1 or 2 proteins. But I do agree with you that the visceral fat is also correlated with a lot of those chronic health conditions.
Yeah. I think you also called out an important point, which is it's like rice and these white starches are just so ingrained in our culture. It's it's almost like you're turning a back on your culture to like
Yeah.
start cutting out rice and noodles from your diet. I think that's a really hard thing for most people. And w- that's why I was like, I would say like, we're not trying to tell people, oh, like rice and noodles are like evil or anything. It's just that, hey, we can create a new standard that, people can still enjoy, yet they can
Yeah.
feel good about eating. Like, then you don't have to turn your back on your culture in a way.
You guys should definitely start off with ramen and then do rice next. Or if you cracked rice, that's like, I think I read like
That'd be
ramen's
next
a
level.
$42 billion industry. I feel like rice must be like a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
I agree.
So that's cool. I think what you guys are doing is a very noble mission. And where's the company today and where do you guys want to take it over the next few years?
Yeah, the company is, I think even, my co-founder and I are always shocked by just like I wouldn't even call it success, but just like the demand we've seen.
Hmm.
Clearly in the US, there's been a lot of So here's an example. So you mentioned the instant ramen market. I think now it's like $52 billion
Jeez.
globally, but pre-COVID, the US was only a $4 billion market of that 52 billion, or I think it was smaller then. And then within that short span of like 2 years of COVID, the US market for instant ramen doubled to 8 billion. And
Wow.
part of this is also driven by what's been going on in the media. So I'll give you an example. During COVID, we interviewed some of our customers who kind of live in like middle America. They were typically like middle-aged Caucasian, like school teachers. Like that was like two people we actually interviewed who were customers. And we asked one of them, "How did you even hear about Immi?" And she said that during COVID, the schools were kind of on lockdown, so she was stuck at home. She couldn't teach. So she would go on Netflix, and then Netflix kept serving her these Korean dramas, which was a genre she had never watched in her life. So she started watching this show called Crash Landing on You. I have never watched it, but this was
No.
a really popular Korean drama. And she said that like in some of the episodes, they would eat this like Korean ramen. And she was like, what is that? So, but she had like, she was worried about like her health issues. So she typed healthy ramen and we were the first to show up
Oh
in like the
man.
search results. And it was just a mind blowing anecdote because I was like, holy crap, like this is an example of media actually influencing taste and then like changing how they're eating. And so I think what's going to happen is in the US, you're going to start seeing more and more of this where it's like once you try Asian food based on like the American palate, which I would say is a little bit more limited in terms of the flavors. Like when you do try Asian food, it's really hard to go back. And then especially like with the American values, most people I think in America are more familiar with health and just nutrition. So when you have that confluence of like health, nutrition, and Asian food, it's just going to be great, I think, for the business that we're trying to build here. So where I was going with this is like we have been very lucky, I think, over the past 3 years to see a lot of growing demand for a healthier ramen like Immi, and we want to continue satiating that demand. So we're going to keep expanding in retail. Uh, we we're in about like 2,000 retail doors. We need to continue just doubling that, tripling that year on year, and then uh, we're actually going to be launching a cup noodle format shortly. I think in about a month or two. So that'll be pretty exciting to try to replace the OG cup noodles of the world
Yeah.
with a healthier version, and maybe hopefully seeing that in like airports and like
Yeah.
universities, things like.
Dude, that's so crazy, the story you mentioned around the school teacher, because, a couple thoughts come to mind for me there. I always joke that the biggest export out of Korea is their culture. And I think
Hmm.
you're right. Over the past couple of years, it's becoming a little bit more top of mind, a little bit more, I guess, mainstream with like BTS and all their Korean dramas and the reality shows. And it got me
It's
thinking,
wild.
it's wild, right? And it got me thinking that the perception of just Asian/Asian American culture in the US has changed pretty dramatically from when I was younger, which I think a lot of the Asian culture portrayed in society was very like men were very demasculinized and it was very like
Hmm.
kung fu driven, no, can't speak English. And then we went
Totally.
to like the Jeremy Lin era where it was like, oh, there's someone that could play basketball. And then it was just
Yeah.
like all this Korean explosion of entertainment with music and these shows. And I was watching like some show on Netflix where it was like all the most fit people in Korea competing.
Oh, I love that show, Strong or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's just exporting that culture from Asia here. I mean, it's predominantly Korean. And then it can have that ripple effect where someone's going to go on and Google healthy ramen and try a healthy version of ramen.
It's so funny. We have a lot of music investors, and what we've noticed is a lot of them are trying to get exposed to like the whole K-pop audience. So, like Usher, for example, recently did like a music video with Jungkook, who is
No
with
way.
BTS, and we were like, "Whoa, that's wild!" Like, what you just kind of see this like East meets West happening all over the place. And I was recently hanging out with like someone who like works with Lil Durk, like a hip hop artist, and he was really trying to like Lil Durk had done also a song with this other K-pop band called Stray Kids, which is kind of like the new BTS because BTS is in the army now apparently in Korea.
Oh, they are.
And so I was like, yeah, I didn't even realize this, but I was like, wow, even like hip hop, R&B, like they're all trying to kind of merge and get exposure to that K-pop audience. It's pretty wild because that I agree, it was not a thing at all when I was growing up.
Yeah, I feel like the next Taylor Swift is going to come out of Korea globally. I think this will probably be
Yeah,
the biggest global superstar. I would say probably within the next decade is going to come out of Korea, would be my guess.
for sure.
But I think the interesting thing about Emmy is that it touches upon culture in so many different ways. I'll just like watch a show and I'll just see like the ramen pop up. I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? Or, like just different people on social media talking about it. Was that kind of planned, or did you guys just hit on a nerve within culture where so many different people love it or want to get involved with it? That was always a dream of mine with Skillshare. Was like, oh man, I would love for a famous musician to talk about it or teach a class, which we have a lot of that, but not like Immi. I feel like it's really part of culture. Was that planned, or how did that happen?
Well, I think first, thank you. I mean, that's pretty awesome to hear. And I wouldn't say it was like a planned thing. I think what I've come to realize is a lot of people, it doesn't matter if you're like, just someone, like if you're my mom or like, me walking on the street or if you're a celebrity, all of us think fondly of instant ramen as this food that we ate when we had nothing. Like when we
So,
were hustling,
so
we were
true. So true.
we were just trying to make it right in this world, and instant ramen was all we could afford. And that nostalgic memory I've noticed really draws in like an emotional feeling that just
Mm,
appeals to everyone in the world. And I was frankly surprised, when we connected with like like Usher or like Dua Lipa or like Naomi Osaka and all these people, it's like all of them relate to the instant ramen struggle. And so I think that's why it has sort of that cult appeal is it appeals to what I call like the lowest common denominator, which is not true of like most things in this world. And so we've been very fortunate to kind of see that happen. But yeah, I think like outside of that, it's a lot of people already loved the product, but they just couldn't eat it anymore. And so the moment you bring some sort of innovation to a nostalgic industry, it becomes that kind of perfect intersection. So we'll see if we can carry this on, but
I
work to
think you're
do.
right. I didn't even think about that. Where ramen represents like a struggle, and I think a lot of people can relate to that of just eating ramen. For me, it was also New York eating ramen and banh mi sandwiches because they were like $5. But
Mhm.
reminds me of that Kanye lyric where I think I'm going to butcher it, but something along the lines of like standing on top of like the kitchen counter to reach a cabinet to grab ramen at the top of it or something like that. I think a lot of people can relate to eating ramen for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I messaged you once about this, but like even Kanye's team reached out a couple years ago and they were just like, yeah, we keep hearing about like this Immi brand. And they were like, Ye really wants to create like an instant ramen brand because his dream is to feed the world with ramen because it's his favorite food. And we were just like, what? Like, this is mind blowing that like Ye would be interested in this.
Oh man, I bet you he probably ate a lot of ramen. And that was probably the idea that he woke up and then he had his whole team research and then reach out to you. Did that
That
ever
is
go
exactly
anywhere?
what happened. No,
Yeah.
we spent like a little bit of time, but I think there was just like too many. I think he's a pretty like he's very product focused and he has a
Yeah.
lot of demands there, and I think it didn't really work out,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was still like a cool moment I think for the
Oh
team.
yeah, for sure. To get reached out by Kanye is probably once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Switching gears here, one thing that I found fascinating with Emmy is how you run it internally. I've seen you write about chief productivity officer as a
Mhm.
concept, and I always thought that was brilliant. For early stage startup, you would never hire someone to be the CPO, but to have that like mindset coming in to design the culture and how productive or efficient a company could run. How do you implement that internally at your company?
Yeah, I know there's like two trains of thought in like running companies. Like one is like hire just amazing people and like don't worry too much about them. They'll take care of
Yeah,
themselves. And
yeah,
but I think what I've seen, even before Emmy and like 10 years of like Silicon Valley in tech was like anyone can benefit from like general productivity. I always tell people it's kind of like when you're on the airplane, it's like you got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help others.
yeah.
And so like when anyone joins Immi, the first thing we have is like we have this pretty comprehensive onboarding guide, but we've invested a lot of time actually in a few of the sections just teaching people about like how to level up their own task management, project management, and general productivity. And that ranges anywhere from the obvious things of like here are probably like the top 10 to 15 desktop apps you just need to have, like
Yeah.
text expander so you're not like constantly typing the same thing over and over, or like Raycast, which is like a Mac app where you can quickly search any Google Drive, any app or whatever it is, Size Up or like Clean Shots, you can take screenshots. So that's like the very basic. And then from there, we even have like delegation 101 guides, which is like, hey, you joined Immi. Every team member at Immi gets their own executive assistant. And we
Oh,
use executive assistants internationally, but it's like, okay, on your first, like, we'll give you like a month to onboard, but like after that, your manager is going to expect that like every week you write down like 3 to 5 things of your workflow that really should be automated. And we create a forcing function where we're just like, once you have like a list of 10 things, it's time for you to have like an EA. And we try to encourage people. Obviously, you don't want to like force someone into managing an EA if they don't want to, but we make it really easy for them where we're just like, you don't even have to write out the steps of your flow if you don't want. Just record a Loom video going through your
Yeah.
workflow, send it to the EA, and they will write out the steps for you, and then you can just audit the steps. So I think these are like things that we just want to ingrain, and we call these aha moments at Immi, where it's like you may have worked for like 20 years in your career, but ideally you come into Immi and we're giving you a couple aha moments in your onboarding or in like the first 6 months. Where you're just like, holy shit, that's like a mental unlock that I've never considered. And once I go there, I can never go back. And I think things like the productivity, the onboarding guides, like the way we structure our Notion, we use something called a bulletproof system for cross collaboration. I can go into that later. And like, yays, these are all these aha moments that really level up our team members and allow them to operate as if they're like three people in one. So there's a dual benefit. For one, like the team members, they are just like constantly learning and they're like, oh my God, like this not only works professionally, but it bleeds into my personal life. And so they're obviously extremely grateful. And they like, I think our retention is really strong. We have like 100% retention. But two is it also just helps us from like a cost standpoint
Yeah.
where instead of like hiring like a director or something, we can just hire like a senior manager who has like two EAs and basically operates as if they're like a director and a like direct report. And so we do save quite a bit on operating costs.
I think that's a brilliant idea to pair everyone with the EA. I tried that at my last company and didn't really work that well because I think I framed it as like a benefit and it wasn't really pushed. And I realized that most people didn't really know how to delegate, or they always fall into that trap where they would say, I'll just do it myself. It's just faster versus
Hmm.
actually taking a step back and looking at the 10 things they do over and over again. I also saw people start pushing more personal stuff onto the EA because, they're like, I'm too busy to do those things, which I also think is beneficial because, you want to make sure you could take as much off their plate. But how did you make that work at Immi?
This is a concept we actually ended up borrowing from another company that I invested in called Levels Health, which is the continuous
Yeah.
glucose monitor. They keep a centralized table. It's like a centralized database in Notion where every EA in the company has to kind of put all their SOPs in that table. And we realized that this was pretty beneficial because, like you said, it's a problem where team members who are just joining Immi don't know or like are kind of scared to delegate. And so you really have to give them examples to show them like, hey, here are how other team members are delegating right now. So we have a massive table that has different views and each view is a different EA. So you can click into any EA's views and see like, what are the different SOPs that X team or Y team member have already delegated? And it just gives you all these ideas. So you can check that on a weekly basis and be like, oh, it looks like Samal did this or Brandon did this. Like I should probably start using this EA for analytics reporting too, and so on and so forth.
That's brilliant. My last company was regulated, so we were forced to do SOPs on everything because everything was super regulated and we had to follow all the rules. And that was an aha moment for myself where I was like, man, we should have did this for every single company that I ever started, was just to write everything down and
Hmm.
create like a SOP around it. So I didn't pair anyone with EA at the last company, but when somebody would leave the company, it would just be so seamless because everything would be documented. And if anyone had to jump in, they could jump right in and just kind of pick off where that last person left off, especially if everything was documented either in a Loom video or step-by-step instructions. It was super helpful. And I think taking that to the next level where it's like a shared dashboard where everyone can access it, I think is super, yeah, I would, that must be so beneficial for everyone to just be able to add to the database because it would get, I guess, stronger over time, but also be able to pull off the database for anything they would need as well.
Exactly. It almost becomes like a standard raiser or like a
Yeah.
bar raiser because people will look at each other's like SOPs and they'll be like, oh, wow, like I'm going to start. So like one of our team members, he noticed that one of his EAs, like every like month or so, there would be like a process breakdown. And so he told his EA, he was like, hey, can you just like, every time you're doing that task, can you just do a Loom video and just like paste a link to the Loom video in your SOP and like just have your own database of like every action that you've done with the Loom video. And then I know it feels a little big brotherish, but the whole point of it was just so that it's not like he's checking every video. It was more that anytime there was a process breakdown, he would go into the most recent video, quickly audit it and be like, oh, here's what went wrong. Like, let's fix it. And so that became like a new bar raising standard for the rest of the team to also do the same thing.
That's brilliant. And do you do something similar for decision making in the company where there's like a table with, I guess, memos
Yeah.
or how does that work with big or small decisions at the company?
We do have a memos table. It is specifically for any larger
Got
decisions,
it.
what Jeff Bezos calls like the one-way doors. So yeah, usually for any major strategic decision, team members do just write a long form memo that goes into that table. Other team members can comment on it. I think where we probably don't do as good of a good job is like we don't necessarily reference those memos to go back and be like, what was the decision? What was the impact? And like, how does that influence future decisions? So I think that's something we could improve.
How does that work? How does one write a memo, like in the company, and and who makes the decision within the memo?
The memos are team member. So each team member, as long as they feel that they have a decision that warrants like input from other team members, then
Got it.
yeah, anyone has permission to write a memo on that table. It's we don't try to like, lock it only to executives or anything like that. We just want to encourage the practice of writing memos so that even the most junior team members understand that like writing is thinking and like that leads to better decisions. And it's just good to get feedback from other people with those long form memos. And it's scalable because any new team member can just read the whole memos
Oh
table.
yeah. I always thought it would be interesting to go back and see who was right on the decisions that were made and
Yeah.
see what their right percentage would be, because there's like a shooting percentage in basketball. I was always
Mhm.
curious to see who was right in the decisions they made and give them the ability to take on more and more responsibility. So there's always that philosophy that you want to empower everyone and you can learn from a lot of decisions. But when startups are moving really fast, you don't want to make wrong decisions where it drags out longer than it needs to be because a lot of those decisions might take months or years before you can see if they really pan out. So that was something I thought would be really interesting. I don't think it
I
would
love
really
that.
fly in a lot of cultures unless it's like super cutthroat or something along those lines. But I always thought that was an interesting concept.
That's like the biohacking for the startup.
It sounds like a good idea, but I think it would backfire because a lot of people would be very scared to make big
Yeah.
decisions, which I think most people are to begin with. But I think they would shy to like making the easy decision that they know is just going to have a high probability versus taking a risky decision that's probably not going to work. But if it did work, it would have like a 10x outcome. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people would probably take a safer route. So that's probably why it wouldn't work. But in theory, I thought it would always be an interesting idea. Or maybe just for yourself, you just kind of go through and see, like keep a mental note for yourself on who you can promote with more responsibility.
Yeah, I love it. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down too, which is like you assign weightings to the decision, like
Yeah.
to decide if it was important or not.
But I think a fascinating thing I noticed is once people go through that cycle and it's part of the culture, they do get. I've noticed a few things happen. One is it fosters a healthier debate where people can disagree and share their thoughts and feel like their voices are heard. So I think that's good because it pushes the idea into a better place. And people that weren't used to making decisions, like let's say there's like 10 levels of decisions where the CEO makes level 10. Most people are uncomfortable making that decision one level above where they are. And it forces them to get comfortable in that uncomfortable zone and then, keep moving up the ring of decisions. So I found those two
Totally
things to be super helpful just going through this process. But not for every culture because you have to write everything down and writing a memo is very hard.
agree.
Is there anything else that you do within your culture operating system that is unique or different than most startups?
I don't know if this is unique, but like one book we recommend or like highly recommend every team member read is a book called The Goal. When I was going through undergrad, I started taking industrial engineering courses, which it's not, we used to joke, it's not real engineering. It's like linear optimization. So it's like you have like a word problem that's like, this factory is dealing with this problem. Like, how do you resolve it? And then you just do all the Excel modeling to like, and goal seeking to figure out the optimal solution. But the first book they recommend in those classes is a book called The Goal, which is a fictional book of a factory manager who has a failing plant and he has a month to save the plant or else like HQ is going to shut him down. So he's forced to basically learn like industrial engineering from scratch. And all it really is just like it teaches you about like the concept of like identifying like bottlenecks and throughputs and like automations. And so why I like this book is because I think fundamentally like a lot of things, not just in business and like even in personal life, just come down to processes that you can automate and like it doesn't even have to be automated, but you can identify again where the bottlenecks are and just like and also where you can double throughput, things like that. So it becomes this like mental aha moment for team members, I think, because when you pair that with like EAs and just like productivity, all of a sudden it's almost just like you can solve any problem really. And you not just solve a problem, but you can almost like you can do like 80/20, where the team member is like, okay, let me like quickly launch like say an experiment. Let's figure out like how to do it in an unscalable manner. Then let's identify all the bottlenecks. Let's either use EAs to plug them in, or we can use tools like Zapier. And then they can build like solutions from the ground up without paying for like thousands of dollars of software. And we've done this in like numerous functions across the company. So for example, like a lot of consumer brands, they have like entire teams that do like seeding of
Hmm.
product, where they're like shipping out product to influencers. And it's a lot of work. You typically need like 2 to 3 full-time people to do that. But we built a whole system that, it's just a combination of like spreadsheets, Zapiers, a couple of EAs, and we've automated it all. And there's no full-time team member, it just runs on autopilot. And it allows us to get like millions of impressions a month for relatively low cost. So again, we try to teach this to every team member. It doesn't matter if you're sales, design, CX, whatever, but like follow the goal and you can pretty much solve any problem that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's amazing. How big is the team today?
Yeah, it's 9 full-time in the US, and then we have 6
Uh,
internationals who we treat as full-time team members. Just
yeah.
legally, they're not really. So it's about 15, and that's including both co-founders. So we're not a big team, and I hope we actually stay pretty lean and small, just because I've seen how communication can break down so fast post, 10 even people. But again, we're also different. We're not like tech with like insane margins, so you don't
Yeah.
really want to be
Is
like
that is
growing
it
your org structure.
is it 15 with the EAs or is the EAs on top of that?
EAs would be on top of that.
Okay.
We have about like 7 EAs, I think, at this point
I
that we
think that's
share across
amazing.
the
I
org.
would have guessed that you were like dozens of employees. I love the fact that you guys are keeping the team as small as possible and creating a lot of leverage where a lot of the things that a traditional company would do would be, oh, well, the playbook is you have to hire a small team to handle this. And we're like, no, we don't need to do that anymore. And then if you factor in all the new AI stuff that's coming out that can make things even more efficient, I think that's going to be like the cheat code of 2024 moving forward is like, can you operate with a small team and still have the same output without having the team work insane hours and just
Hmm.
have a lot more leverage and just cut out all the like really repetitive work that is just unnecessary and just automate it.
Yeah, I live in LA now, and it's pretty much like consumer central. And
Yeah.
last week, I went to this consumer happy hour event. I like met these two founders of this company called NGL, which is like I guess I'm like too old to understand this stuff now, but it's like a consumer social product that generates a link, and then people can post a link in their IG or Snapchat stories. And then like other people can answer those questions anonymously. And then people can pay a subscription to get hints at who actually was the real answer of those. But anyways, it's really popular amongst like high school
Shoot.
students and Gen Z. And it's like a $20 million a year business, and the team is literally 5 people.
Oh,
It's
that's
the two
amazing.
founders and 3 engineers. And just goes to show like what you can do with no code automation and just even just like high operating leverage these days. And it's a bootstrapped, fully profitable company.
Oh man, that's amazing. One is I've never heard of that app, so I feel really old
Same,
now. I think
same.
NGL stands for not gonna lie. I think. I'm
Yes.
not even sure. But dude, that's so real. I think the new flex is gonna be like I remember just sitting in board meetings where they would always talk about, oh, the revenue per employee is X. And if you benchmark it, it's this. But I think, man, if you have, I guess, where would their revenue, yeah, would be, millions per person, which I think is insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
It's like formula per person, which is
Yeah.
like ridiculous.
Yeah. I'm
Bootstrap
going like
company.
the polar opposite route where I'm just trying to be a solo creator where I just do everything myself, which is like the most unproductive thing. But I don't want to manage anyone. I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to learn to figure this out myself. Shifting gears into your personal life, what is the OS for your like personal life and how you run your family? I think there's a lot of lessons to learn with the work stuff. And does that bleed over? Do you take what works in the work stuff and apply it in the personal stuff? Or do you do your family personal stuff differently?
I try to apply similar structures to my personal life, and everyone probably has their own personal operating system. So why I even came to this whole mindset to begin with was like in my early 20s, when I was early in my career, I worked for this like education tech company, and I was just like pretty new. I was pretty young. I think I was pretty immature, and I didn't know how to handle multiple projects at any given time.
Hmm.
Like the moment I had like 4 to 5 stacking projects with different tasks, I was just like, oh shit, I don't know how to prioritize any of this. And like, I'm very candid, like I got let go from that job, and it was like a devastating moment for me
Yeah.
to just go through that. So like most things, like or most people, what they would do is like I swung to the opposite side of the spectrum where I was like, all right, I got to just brush up on like overall project task productivity management to ensure this never happens again. I think like it's funny because people, if they knew me when I was younger, I'm a pretty chaotic, like creative person. I like to think where I'm not really organized by nature, and now I've kind of to be.
Hmm.
So a lot of these systems now, when people listen to me, they're like, "Dude, you must have been the most disciplined child." And I was like, "No, I was the opposite. I was horrible. I had to create these systems so that I could build better habits and like get shit done." So now, how I structure my personal life is like I have like, there's a bucket of reflections, which is I do weekly reflections religiously. So every Saturday morning, I spend about 2 to 3 hours going through this long form document of questions that I've kind of curated over my life. And it just reviews a lot of my week, a lot of like these important questions, like, what are 20% of the actions that drove 80% of the results? And it forces me to critically think about these, what I call like sniper leverage points in my
Hmm.
life that really move the needle. And I just have like a lot of that type of stuff. It also helps me plan for the upcoming week. I also have a rigorous annual reflections process, which I think most people do, but I spend about 3 to 4 days on the last week of every year doing this like huge annual reflections document. And that document gives me the overarching goals that then get broken down into
Okay.
like the monthly, like quarterly, monthly, so on and so forth. So
For people that kind of want to mimic that, but might not have as much time, you'll learn pretty soon once you have kids, the 3 hour Saturday morning
yeah,
is not going to happen. But let's say the 2080, what are some of the most impactful questions that you ask yourself in that weekly review? And what's the most important things that you do on your annual review?
yeah. Great call out, by the way, on the parent thing. I
Yeah, I
agree
was
with
like,
you.
dude,
So
unless you're going to wake up at 4 in the morning to knock that out on a Saturday morning. Yeah.
no,
Y
it's not
It's funny
happening.
that you actually become more productive when you have kids because you realize that something that you might have done in 2 to 3 hours on a Saturday morning, you're like, "Shit, I'm gonna have to knock this out in 30 minutes," and do it at 6 in the morning before they wake up.
Yeah, I always hear that. I'm actually hopefully excited for that. So
Yeah,
you and I
yeah.
were speaking before, but I have a baby boy due in a couple months, and so I'm
Congrats.
I'm like, thank you, and I'm very much curious how my entire schedule will shift, and all of this like productivity nonsense will probably disappear. But going back to your question, so if I had to shorten this, I'm looking actually at my like weekly reflection template. There's probably a couple critical questions I would still keep. One is very simply, it's just like, what did I accomplish this week?
Mhm.
Slash, like, what went well? And it's just like it'll help me understand, like, okay, did I actually do anything meaningful this week? Like
Mm.
the $10,000 per hour work. There's what 20% of actions drove 80% of the results. I think it's always good to reflect on that question. The third question is, where did I get stuck? Slash, what am I putting off? And I think that's a very important question that is the bottleneck question of the goal of like, a is like, okay, is it stuck from because of like lack of trying or is it lack of skill? And you have to identify very quickly, like, is it something that I'm just deprioritizing or is it because I don't actually have the answer?
Yeah, what do you have
Um,
a recent example of what fell into that bucket?
let's see. So like one was we have a potential partnership with like a very large K-pop group. They wanted us to give them like a deck, like explaining like the partnership and the collaboration. And I have been like putting it off for like a while. And so I kind of listed that there and I was thinking about it and I was like, is it because I'm just too lazy to make this damn deck? Or is it because this is not actually a true needle mover for our business? And those are like two very different questions you have to like analyze. And yeah, it's really important because you might be working on like, you might think this is like a cool opportunity, but like there's a reason you're putting it off. So I had to examine that pretty closely.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And then the other two questions I would say is like, what is the hardest problem I'm thinking about? And then what would solving this problem look like if it were easy, which is borrowed from Tim Ferriss. Because I think that lets you think about like, yeah, the biggest $10,000 problem. And then like, okay, stop like overblowing. How do you solve this in an easy manner? So it goes back to like the rapid demand testing thing of like, just try it and like see how you can get it off the ground. There is like, the last thing is probably like, what am I grateful for this week?
Oh,
Just
that's
like,
a
I think
good
it's
one.
so important.
I try to do that almost every single day, and I think that's one of the most important questions because it obviously showcases gratitude, but also I think helps rewire your brain, especially over the long run. And then you start thinking about what should I write tomorrow about what happened today, and I think that's probably the easiest question anyone can answer on a daily basis. That's going to have a really big impact over a long period of time.
I agree with that. I just finished this book called The Big Leap by this guy named Gay Hendricks, and it's so funny because like a lot of times I read these like personal development books kind of based on recommendations from other like founders or friends. And the first half of the book, I was like, oh my God, this is so woo woo. Like, I don't know if I can get through this. The book is basically about how like we all, there's like four major like issues that most people have in their life that holds them back from taking that big leap to reach the next level. And like an example is like every time something like really good happens in your life, you naturally try to self-sabotage yourself and you don't even realize it, but like you will like you can think back, and I bet everyone has an example of this where you just like, oh, this amazing thing happened. Oh, but wait, like it's not as good as because of this XYZ. Or you do something just to like screw yourself. And I've seen this happen even in like relationships where you get in a relationship where you're like, oh my God, this relationship is too good to be true. Oh, I gotta find something wrong with it because I don't deserve to be here. And that this whole book just like revolves around that concept of like how you have to be willing to like accept like a good situation and let yourself be in that good situation versus trying to like bring yourself back down to room temperature or like how, you know, your circumstances of how you grew up in life. And yeah, I think that like what you just said about the gratitude piece and rewiring your brain is so important to do that, because if you don't give yourself gratitude, you're always going to bring yourself back down. You're going to self-sabotage and bring yourself to like you won't you won't take the big leap.
Got it.
So now I've been like recommending that book, and I'm like, I'm trying to get through the first half.
I'm surprised you got through the first half because any book that's like super woo, I'm like, "Pff, next." Like 5 pages in, I'm like, oh, I'm not. This is not going to resonate with me.
It was specifically because of the person who referred it,
Okay,
where I was
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
I was like, oh, you've gotten to where you are. Like, I respect you, so I don't think you would give me like a random book.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that book. I'll add it to my list. For your annual, is it kind of like a similar process, or is it more goal centric, or what does that look like?
It is similar. I think one thing that surprised me was when I was younger, most of my like annual reviews were goal setting, and it was always, you know, it's like when you're younger, it's very ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to do next year? Blah blah blah. How do I break it down? I think as I've gotten older, I've done a lot more of like the first day entirely is just reflection questions on my person. It's like, what was your favorite song of this year? Like,
Yeah,
what were your favorite images of this year? Where I'll like, you know, go in my Google Photos, create a little gallery. And I used to kind of roll my eyes at this stuff because I'm very like forward facing. I think most founders end up doing that. But now I look back and I'm like, damn, you know, like we're just kind of a collection of our memories at the end of the day. And you know, when I look back on my deathbed, I'm just gonna be like, it's kind of great, like to look at all these memories and be like, yeah, that was my favorite movie or my favorite article of like 2019. So I come to appreciate that a little bit more. And I know it doesn't necessarily like help me plan for the future, but it's just a nice thing to reflect on.
I've come to the same conclusion where I still set goals. This year, I'm trying to like pair that with setting a system where I can develop new habits. But I also had the same realization as you that all those little memories actually is what makes life worth living and makes it like enjoyable. So always trying to remember those and document those, even though it feels a little like, why am I doing this? I started noticing that those things actually matter a lot more. And I wish I did that a lot more like a decade ago, or even when I was building companies. They're just so focused on one thing. But yeah, I found those things to be really, really important.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd say outside of that, it's probably pretty standard to most people otherwise.
Yeah,
So
got it.
yeah. So yeah, those are the two, like from a reflection standpoint, that's kind of how I focus on those. And then from a general organization, I do follow like Tiago Forte's PARAB like method, which is projects, areas, resources, archive. I think like I used to be a productivity junkie, and yes, maybe a little bit sort of, but I've also just come to realize a lot of it is like you don't need to over
Yeah, I
productize it
agree.
or whatever the term is. Like it's not, what are you going to do with all the extra time? Like more of it studying productivity. So I think PAIR is just like nice and simple. It's just like, yes, I
Yeah.
have some projects, I have some areas, some resources. It's all really all I
Yeah.
need to do in my personal life.
It,
Yeah,
do you do all that in Notion?
it's all in
Got it.
Notion. I just have pages for,
Each
you know,
one.
all of these things. I think like a few things I personally love calling out, and it's not very work oriented, but like it is very personal and family oriented, is from like a love and relationship standpoint. My wife and I have a page together in our areas, and it's like we try to invest in our relationship as equally as like everything else in our life. And again, I know this is going to be hard when we're parents, but just a small example is like we have a page called Life Dinner, And on that page is a list of like, again, it's like a curated list of questions where every month we go try to do like a date night. And then over dinner, we'll answer those like 10 to 12 questions. And it's a really just a form of self couples therapy. We could, of course, do couples therapy in a productive manner, but like we like doing this because you talk out a lot of these like small problems and little things that build up a relationship where you don't get a chance to fully flush them out. And I think it's these little things that compound into the big things. And that's why when something happens, it's like, oh, it's not actually because of that thing. It's because of this little thing you did like a month ago.
Yeah.
So we want to remove all those things. So the life dinner is like something we religiously follow. Like other pages in that like couples page is like we have this Michelin star list, which is, you hear Michelin star, you're like, oh, they eat at fancy restaurants. That's not what it means. It means we keep a list of individual dishes that we've eaten. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be at like our local McDonald's in like, Japan or whatever. But like, we keep little like individual dishes and we each give them our own star ratings. And it has to be good for us to want to put it on the Michelin star list. But now we have this like collection of like just like fun dishes, like appetizers, main dishes, like desserts, drinks that we really loved. And it's also fun to share with people, but it goes back to that memories thing. We can be like, dang, I remember that shrimp fillet, burger we had at McDonald's in Japan. It was epic.
Yeah.
Like, you'll never forget that. And it's not fancy, $1. So
I love the life dinner idea. What are some of the questions that are like in that document?
yeah, I'm pulling it up. So the first thing you always do is you want to do a recap. Like you basically each pull out your phone and you look at the past 30 days on your calendar because you just need to quickly refresh what actually happened in the past 30 days. Then the questions you go down are just like, what was like the best thing that happened? It can be like a memory, an event, a moment.
Is it
and then like what was the worst?
Is it for each individual or for both of y'all or either or?
You go back and forth. So typically a life dinner should last like 2 to 3 hours over dinner.
Got it.
And you take turns. So like if I go first with the first question, then she answers. And then on the second question, she will go first. And then I'll go afterwards. So it's what is the best thing that happened? What is the worst thing that happened? What is one thing I can do differently to be a better partner for you? And that can involve like, what should I start, stop, or continue? And then you have questions like, what is your biggest worry? Or what is your biggest regret? And then like, what is your biggest point of pride or brag? Because I think you still want to like show gratitude for each other and like talk about things you're grateful for.
Are you answering these questions like directly with your wife in mind, or can the best thing be like, oh, this best thing happened this month was work related? Do you keep it just open ended to whatever the other person wants to talk about?
It is half because I think there are times when both of you are just going to totally sell out and be like, oh, the best thing was our anniversary. Like no one wants to like not say that.
Yeah.
But then we kind of joke. We're like, all right, you're not allowed to say that. Like, I want you to truly just brag about something that happened in your life. So, and then like some of the fun ones are just like, what is the thing we spent money or time on that provides the most value? And we often find that it's like, maybe it's something like, oh, we decided to hire like cleaner like this, and we like it so much that hell, we're going to put in the budget. Or we we realize we love getting like foot massages like every Friday. So we're like, that's not going to break the bank. Let's just like make it our little like fun thing. And so like every Friday we go get a foot massage and like, it's the most value because we like hang out, we get dinner afterwards.
I love it.
It's relaxing.
I have a theory that foot massages is what keeps Asian people looking so young.
It's so good.
Because it's like, what's the one thing that is in all Asian culture is they all love getting foot massages.
That's so true. Even my dad loves it. And he hates
everybody.
Like everything.
They even have like foot massage machine. There's a whole industry just around foot massages.
That's so true. I bought, or like when I moved from New York to LA, we didn't bring our foot massager. So for some reason, I think I shipped it to my parents, and my dad was like, "Man, I use that thing like every day." Like, he never uses anything.
Oh man. Speaking of your parents, I saw the tweet you had where you took them to the really overpriced Korean supermarket and they just...
Or no, it's Erewhon here in LA. It's like it's just like a general like American supermarket, but it's wild because the first thing my parents look at is I think they'll walk into any store and they'll look at the price of the avocado as like a proxy.
That's all Asian parents.
Yeah. So they picked it up and I think it was like one avocado was like $6 or something. It was like ridiculous. And they just stood and they stared and they turned and they looked at me and they just gave me this, they just started laughing like so hard. I thought I was in like a sitcom or something. Yeah. And then they were like walked around the entire produce section, just started laughing at every single thing. And I thought it was the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. So I just kind of like for fun tweeted, and I didn't realize that like everyone kind of feels the same
Yeah.
way. But hopefully, Aaron got some good business out of it.
I remember when I lived in New York, I would go to the supermarket in Chinatown, and I swear that the same supplier for their vegetables is the same one that would supply Whole Foods. It would just be half the price. Like the avocado there would be like $2, and I would go to Whole Foods, it'd be like $5. Like, dude, it's the same company.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, maybe I'm also curious, maybe to wrap up, like, what are your thoughts on coffee sobriety? Speaking of tweets, because I saw you tweet about that too. What prompted you to send that out? Because that's something I've been thinking about. Because I think past few years have been people abstaining from alcohol. But
Mhm.
I think I read somewhere that if coffee came to market today, it would be illegal because of the amount of caffeine and all this other stuff related to it.
Yeah, I think it's a very touchy subject, and I think unlike alcohol, there's plenty of studies that show that coffee is perhaps good for certain things. I think it's like heart health. I'm not exactly sure what the benefits are, but
I think you,
um,
you could find a report or study that shows anything has a
that's
positive
true.
impact on your health.
That's
Literally
true.
anything. Yeah. Like, yeah, coffee is really good for you. It reduces all these things. And you realize that it's like a bullshit study.
I know. I remember when our mutual friend Justin Mears like told me about how like a lot of these, I think it was like the cereal companies lobbied like the food pyramid
Oh, man.
and basically like
Yeah.
ensure that like cereal is like number three and it's better. It's considered like better than meat. Like I was
That's
like, wow, that's
insane. Yeah.
insane. So money, yeah, money just kind of runs everything. But yeah, I think the coffee sobriety thing. Well, for one, because I work in the intersection of food and beverage and health and wellness, I'm seeing the rise of all of these like mushroom coffee and like
Mm.
coffee alternatives, like mud water, rise. And it's absolutely insane how fast these companies are growing. Just to give you like a benchmark, like the average like mushroom coffee alternative company is probably able to scale to like 100 million in like 2 to 3 years. That's
Oh,
how,
wow. That is
and that's like,
crazy.
I have 4 examples of this. And you would think like, wait, this is a competitive market. Surely like the cost for acquisition would rise, but no, this market is massive and people are looking for alternatives. Because I think people realize that coffee is a legalized drug in a way.
It
It's
is.
giving you the same effects and people have withdrawals and hangovers from it. It is an addiction. Like you wake up and you crave it immediately. I'm seeing, at least in the fringes of like health and wellness, people are trying to swap for these like mushroom alternatives, mushroom superfood versions. And then I think about just like people in my network and how just reliant they are on it. And to me, it's almost like, how they say alcohol is basically like stealing happiness from tomorrow. I feel sometimes that like coffee is stealing energy from the later version of your life or
Yeah.
whatever the version of you is in the future. So it was more of a personal thing. And it was a very divisive tweet. People were
Yeah.
kind of just like, stop taking coffee away from me, like linking me to all these health reports.
Oh,
And
of course.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just I'm generally a fan that like, hey, if you can reduce exogenous substances, period, to your body, it's probably better for you.
Yeah, for
But
sure. So do you drink
don't
coffee
have.
at all?
I drink some green tea. Like again, it's like typically like Saturdays when I'm jumping into like deep work, I'll sometimes drink that. I found it to be a little less jittery for me, but no, unless it's a social setting where I'm out for grabbing coffee with a friend, like I try never to drink coffee.
Yeah. About once or twice a year, I'll go through a week or two where I just stop drinking coffee to reset. And those are the most miserable weeks. I never get headaches. I'll get a headache. Fall asleep in the middle of the day and try to take a long nap. I'm super grumpy and irritable. And that's just a sign that coffee cannot be good for you if the withdrawal systems are that bad. But it's easy
Yeah.
for me to cut out alcohol. But coffee, man, I don't know if I can cut that out. I would definitely say I'm addicted.
Good luck, man.
Yeah.
It's a hard one.
All right. My last question for you is, what is the dumb mated dream that you finally accomplished? It was
Hmm.
similar to what you wrote about on Twitter. So curious to hear the story behind your answer there.
Yeah. So for context, when I was a child growing up, both my parents immigrated from Taiwan and like standard immigrant story, like came here with nothing, no social or financial capital. So they just make their way up. And we always had these like really old refrigerators that never had like ice dispensers. And so whenever I went to my like rich friends' homes, you would just take a cup and push it against the refrigerator and like ice would come out. And I was like mind blown. I was like, dude, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life because we have ice trays and you freeze the water overnight and then you like crack the corners and like,
Yeah, I had the same thing.
shatter everywhere. And you try to make the ice jump up so you could like grab it and put it in your cup. And I was like, dude, I wish I had an ice dispenser. And it's just like a little quiet luxury. I think like I'll know I made it when I have a refrigerator that has like a dispenser. So I just tweeted that where I was like, these days I go grab ice and I'm like, I feel so because it reminds me you don't need a lot of things in your life to be truly happy.
Yeah.
Life's all of those like little moments. So that for me was like just like kind of a joke. Like, yeah, it actually, well, it's not even a joke. It is like a look, like I've made it moment. I think also just like what I told you earlier, like the ability to get a foot massage
Oh,
whenever
yeah,
I
that's
want
mine. Yeah.
is totally a made it moment. And then if I had to go real big with the made it moment, like recently we, as part of Immi, like we got invited to, God, this is gonna sound so humble brag. We got invited to HBS to lecture, like guest lecture in
Oh,
one of
that's
their
amazing.
classes. And why it was really important to me was because when I grew up, my dad would sit me down before every test at school and he'd be like, hey, teach me the subject. And English is not his first language. So it's like he probably didn't even understand what I was teaching him. He just wanted to make sure I truly knew the subject material and he would like watch my eyes. And so because of that, I really started to love teaching and like I've taught my entire life through high school and college. And I knew my dad, like for him, get an education that he couldn't have and like being able to, one day like guess like, cause I also, I'm not getting an MBA. I'm sorry. Like that's just not in my like path. And I knew him and my mom were like disappointed, but to be able to be like, hey dad, at least I got to guest lecture here was I think a very like happy moment for all of us. It was like a collective dream we got to share, a true American dream, I think as an immigrant family. So that was like really a made it moment that I'm super, super grateful for. And yeah, I think that was awesome.
Love all of those. Well, thanks, Kevin, for jumping on the podcast. I love our conversation around talking about Asian culture to ice dispensers. But I really appreciate you
Yeah.
coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Before you end it, I have a funny anecdote for you. I just want
Sure.
to end
Yeah,
it
yeah.
real
Let's
quick.
do it.
So when I was in college, yeah, I think I'm a little younger than you, but I tried to start. I was like really passionate about. I still am very passionate about education. So I tried to start like an education tech company in my like freshman year of college. And I remember at that time you had just started Skillshare,
Yeah.
and I think Goggin had just started Udemy. And so I used to like read your journey, and like I remember when Skillshare was still teaching, like you guys were using the in-person
Oh, yeah.
classes, like renting facilities. And I was like, dude, that's brilliant. Like that's such a good move. And like I used to just be like, okay, how do we iterate our strategy? And so like many, many years later, our friend Sahil Lavingia, like after he invested in Immi, he was like, anyone else you want to intro to? I'm like, well, I've always like followed this dude, Mike, but never really spoke to him. So he sent you an email. He like forwarded like our information to you and CC'd me. And he was like, hey, Mike, like, Kevin Smart, blah, blah, blah. And I remember telling my then girlfriend, I was like, yo, like, I'm finally going to be able to talk to Mike, like this dude I've followed for over a decade. And then you straight up were just like, cool, I'm in. You just responded and you didn't even set up a call. I was like, dude, this is like amazing. But I was like, I don't really want to reach out and set up a call in case he changes his mind. So I'm just going to let this be. So anyways, I just want to say it's awesome to finally meet you in person. It's just like a funny story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pocket. So it's funny. This is the first time we're meeting.
Yeah, it's
Thanks
such a
for,
funny story, but if I see it and I like it and it's coming from a trusted source, I'm not a huge fan of calls, but I should probably schedule calls with companies that I decide to invest
I'm
in.
not saying you don't do that. I'm just saying I appreciate it.
Yeah, there
I'm
are these.
sure.
No, I think the funny story behind that story is I was following you guys for a while because I've
Oh
first
wow.
popped up and I was like, oh, this is such a great idea. And for me, I'm very passionate about Asian American culture. I remember I wrote an essay on that in college about how it's portrayed in culture and how it could change. So when I saw what you guys were doing, I was like, oh, no brainer. I
Awesome.
don't even need to talk to the person I'm in. So love what you
Cool.
guys are
I appreciate
doing.
the support.
And I'm so excited for all the stuff that you're building and how you're doing it. And I'm just very excited for the journey that you're on.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.